Our next speaker, Joe Fuca, CEO of Reputation.com, is here to discuss how to win in today's feedback economy. Joe, we're so excited to have you.
I'm glad to be here with you today. Give me a little bit of interaction in terms of what kind of crowd do I have. Raise your hand if you're managing in the sales group at your company. Just give me a little bit of it's actually a pretty decent group. Raise your hand if you're at all involved with like the sales development group, like the SDR group, the BDR group. Pretty good percentage here. All right, maybe 20% on that side. What about just straight out sales? You're a salesperson. Okay, so we got almost like a 20% of each of those three categories. How about sales operations, analytics? Give me a little hand there. All right, they only let one of you out today? That's not good. All right, 2, here we go, yes. Hey, 3, all right, we got 3 ops. Listen, operations is super important, so that's the only way you can really run a company, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about some of that as we get going here. Any of you guys use these AirPods? Raise your hand if you ever used an AirPod, okay? Last night, I left the carrier in the taxi, so you gotta love that. So, you know the little white thing it goes into? What am I gonna do now? I can't charge it. Probably gonna have to go out to Amazon and see if you can buy just the carriage side of it, but thought I'd share that little presentation with you. Okay, so you guys kind of see the slides here. I'm gonna walk you through a couple of things that are interesting today. My background has been sales management most of my career. Someone talked me into running a company about a year ago. I decided that if I could run the revenue side of the business, and then I was elevated at Financial Force to be a president of the company, so I ran the revenue and the customer success side. I thought, okay, now I'm gonna try to actually be the CEO and create a great culture in a company, have a little fun with everybody, and try to create a real win-win environment. And after a year of being a CEO at Reputation.com, so far it looks like it's holding true. We are having a little fun, we're growing. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a few minutes. But I'm gonna run through a couple of cool examples with you today. I don't think we've seen that on this side of what I'll call the tarp, on how we've used G2 a little bit in my career. So I'll show you a couple of really cool examples. So back in 2011, I became the first worldwide VP of sales of a company called DocuSign. Raise your hand if you've ever used DocuSign. Okay, much bigger percentage than earlier. So back in 2011, when I took the role, when I was ever at a conference like this, I would ask people to raise their hand. They even knew what electronic signature was, and it was about 10% of the people in the crowd that even knew what it was. So at that particular point in time, we were like, how do we get the brand out? How do we create a space? And so we were thinking, all right, I actually went back and took a screenshot here. What is this, 2015? So I went back and took 2015. I probably could have went deeper into my email and tried to pull it out. But just to give you guys like an idea, if you're an entrepreneur or if you're a startup and you're on the sales side, you want to create a brand that people can sort of get their arms around. And so if you think about what G2 is, and actually it's what my company does now too for location-based systems, is it's all about peers giving other peers recommendations on product usage. So if you're trying to build a brand, you probably want to make sure that you're represented in the G2 world in a really positive way so that you can use that in your sales cycles. And so here at DocuSign back in 2015, we created blogs. We tried to show where we ranked. At the time, we had some competitors that are no longer existing today. But at that time, we wanted to kind of like show that we were ahead, fight it out with the competition, maybe even catch a little bit of backdraft of them being maybe a particular bigger brand. And so at the time, that was really important to us. So that's kind of how we used it at DocuSign. It worked pretty effectively. Then at Financial Force, we were also trying to figure out a way to build our brand. And so when I got there and became their president back in 2016, I decided let's start being more aggressive and using some of the latest technology in G2 where we could actually potentially use it as drop downs where people could ask for the report and then we would gate them and then create leads from those. Obviously, we want to be a leader in a particular space, and that particular space was PSA for professional services organizations. And so we did everything. We started to use some of the badges in our emails, as you can see here. I think I pulled one back from one of those years. I don't know if we dated this one. But you can kind of see that it was really important to us to show it on the website. So that was another way that was really important to kind of get it out there and show that people liked us. At Reputation, we've kind of taken it a step further. At Reputation.com, we've been thinking, okay, how do we, since we're in the business of collecting reviews for consumers, which is very different than B2B, which is obviously where G2 has made their name. But for consumers, we thought, all right, well, if we're collecting reviews for all of our big customers, let's use this in a very social way. So at Reputation.com, we've gone a little bit further than what we did at DocuSign and Financial Force. We're actually starting to use it pretty aggressively in all of our outbound campaigns. You can see here an email, kind of a generic email from an SDR, trying to make it relevant to that particular market, and then actually maybe put the chart below it so that you can kind of say, hey, other customers like you have used this technology, and then here's where we rank. And again, trying to show that our customers like us, so therefore they're going to give us, high rankings. So that's pretty important when you're doing that outbound. So for some of you in the SDR group, this will be really important for you. The other area that I think is really cool is we've actually tried to just get as much information as we can around the badging, which really wasn't available 4 years ago. But because we're doing a really good job now, we want to make sure that we get those badges out on anything that we can put on, whether it's Twitter or Facebook. Just try to gather some kind of momentum around the fact that you're a leader in a space. And by the way, you can do all kinds of fun stuff with this to try to get some people active, get them to communicate with you on a social platform, and then you can follow up. I'll show you one example. You hear about buyer's intent. When I found this product inside of G2, I was super excited. We didn't use this at Financial Force as much, but at Reputation.com, I'll give you a quick story. It was really interesting. It happened Monday. We were at a conference for healthcare, and our booth was up in the middle of this big area, and all of a sudden the G2 buyer intent went nuts. And we could see that all of our competitors and us were getting pinged on the G2 site to compare us against our competitors. So that's buyer intent. That's the best way you can get. Now that's actually even hotter than a cold lead or a medium lead. We were actually having our salespeople jump right on those because these people are literally in the market for the product. So depending on how your operations feels or your sales team or your methodology, that might be a really good area where you can have your salespeople jump in on something that hot, because if they're looking at your competitor, they're in the market. And if they're your customer and they're looking at your competitor, that's a different topic. And then you better get your customer success team engaged. But that's a good example. Like I was talking to the leader for my SDR group this morning, and she said, I could not believe how much our G2 data went nuts at that conference. And so who knows? It might happen here when people start pinging about who is this company, but definitely there where you're actually presenting to your target market. One of the things that we did on buyer's intent, here's a good example. For those of you that believe in sort of a 7-step or 14-step methodology for your SDR group, you think about the number of times you want to hit people. Well, if you're using the buyer intent, and someone's out there pinging a website, in this case it was Blue Cross Blue Shield, you might not be able to know right off the bat whether they, were pinging it. But in this particular case, we followed up with a three-touch email messaging campaign across 18 different contacts inside of Blue Cross, because a lot of these buyer intents information won't give you the exact person. But you better find out what's really going on. In this particular case, we found someone who wanted a demo. And obviously, we set up a meeting. And if you're an SDR group, that's important to you because, obviously setting up a meeting is pretty important on the front end side of a cycle. So that's a good example of kind of how we looked at buyer's intent and jumped in there with our sales team on that. Okay, so I wanted to just kind of give you a brief overview on how we've used G2 in a couple of the different companies. Now I'm going to kind of walk you down a little bit of a who is Reputation.com, and then I'm going to finish up a little bit with the feedback economy, which I think is super important because it's very relevant to what you're sitting through today at the G2 conference at Reach. Reputation.com is pretty simple. If you think about any company that's selling where their end product is a consumer, guess what? They're leaving reviews on you just like they do on software products at the G2 site. So what Reputation.com does is we work with really big companies to manage their brand and to be able to give messaging back to the CMO or anybody inside of that company that cares about customer experience, as well as the power of the consumer suggestion. So if you think about companies, I'll give you a good example here. There's two really good examples. So we manage all the reviews that could be possibly talked about inside of for Ford. There's 4,000 locations across the US that Ford has dealerships, and all of them have people like you that have either experienced servicing or service sales or selling a car, and you have some experience with that. And you're either going to leave that on a social platform or you'll leave that inside of a Google review. You'll leave that experience somewhere in that process, and Ford cares, right? So in that particular case, we manage all the millions of interactions around that location for Ford so that we can tell if they've got issues with parking, with salespeople, with management, services, whatever that particular issue is, we're trying to manage that for them. So much like you're here today at G2 for software product reviews, there are really big companies out there that have services like auto, like healthcare, that care about your personal reviews, and it helps them drive their business. So in the example of Kaiser, we manage not only their several thousand locations, we also manage all of their physicians' pages. So all their physicians have reviews. Believe it or not, healthcare has changed immensely in 2019. They're actually getting aggressive about trying to help you pick the right doctor for the right problem. And so nowadays, 50% of all Americans under the age of 40 don't have a primary care physician. And so in that case, they actually go out and check people's reviews, doctors' reviews, hospitals' reviews. And so for companies like Kaiser, Ascension Health, Advocate Health, they really care about managing their brand online. And so at Reputation.com, we manage all of those points of presence so that we can give that information back to that CMO or that CXO, so they can actually manage it going forward. So they can make quick adjustments. A lot of times these hospitals have too much wait time in their ER, or they're getting the wrong doctors on the wrong case. And in this particular case, they want to be able to look at that and get their feedback so they can take real-time activity. So what we do at Reputation.com is we give you a score based on what your consumers are saying about you. So much like G2 does that in terms of, earlier you heard Godard talk about unveiling what they use for the score or how they rank you. Just like that, in the reputation space on the consumer side, we do a reputation score for companies based on the things I just walked you through. So whether it's visibility online, or whether it's their sentiment, whether people like them or not, or whether it's their engagement, whether that doctor's been really good with that patient or not, we'll actually manage all that on a platform and give you a reputation score based on that experience. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the feedback economy. So you're here because obviously somewhere you thought about G2 being used for your products if you're a software company, and you want to basically use the advantage of having positive reviews to help you in your sales cycles. If you think about the feedback economy, I think we're in at the beginning of a feedback economy where you've seen the G2 reviews go up. Did you see that earlier today? They had 850,000 reviews. Well, just those last two companies I showed you alone, Ford and Kaiser, have over 10 million consumer reviews, right? So think about the magnitude if I added other customers of mine like General Motors or any of the really big ones that have massive amount of volumes. It's actually correlates a lot to this market on the software side. So the big thing that we're seeing in the economy right now is that consumers are basically, their trust is waning. And you heard that a little bit this morning too, from a couple of the different CMOs. They want to hear from other consumers. The trust factor is dipped, and they want to be able to hear from other consumers about their experiences. And that's really important because, if you think, just look at this percentage of 93% of you, the consumer, are looking at consumer reviews before making a purchase. Well, just think about the correlation that is for software. Now that these operations group and analytics groups, they're all looking at the G2 stuff just like they're looking at consumer stuff before you buy a product there. So correlates very closely. Brands have lost control. That's interesting. A lot of brands think, that live in sort of the 70s and 80s, they're thinking that, the person with the best superstar to sell their car, or their best comedian or best Hollywood star, that's sort of waning now. You're starting to see less billboard activity. It's all becoming more about the unfiltered data, the consumers talking about other products. And so whether that is a software product, or whether it is a healthcare service, or anything to do with that brand, you don't have control anymore, because guess what? Your website is actually the least thing looked at now. What we're finding in the market is that Google My Business and Google is becoming much higher of a traffic for your products. And so if you're a CMO and you have a branded product, you have to really start considering about this thing called zero-click search. Raise your hand if you ever heard of zero-click search. Come on, I bet hardly any. All right, just a couple. So zero-click search is what you're doing in your Google Maps when you look for a Starbucks near me, or you look for a Subway near me. Don't judge me on the products. But like if you're looking at these products and you're doing a near me search, you click right into the map and it takes you to where you're going. And what you don't know is all those logarithms from Google are all based on the number of reviews that those companies get. So you could have two locations of Starbucks that are close to each other. The one that gets served up to you on the top is the one that has the most positive reviews. Bet you didn't know that today, so you learned something. But for those of you that didn't know zero-click reviews, like that's the new world. Like people are searching for things on their maps, on their phone, and then go directly there. So it's become much more aggressive to not be able to control your brand, because you don't even have control over your look and feel on the Google My Business. And so that's a big deal. So now a lot of companies, hopefully yours too, are spending more time on how are we being seen, what's our visibility look like. That's a big deal with Reputation.com. We help people be seen better and around the Google My Business side of things. So 70% of those social conversations that I've been talking a little bit about here are what we call in the wild. These are channels that people are leaving feedback about you and your products in a review, in a social media construct that you have no control over. So I call it data in the wild, and we've been kind of really focused on this in terms of there are people that send surveys. So when you get off an airplane or you leave a restaurant, they'll send you a survey about what your experience was. That's usually like a 3-question survey, or it could be 20 questions. And if you're like me, you're totally blowing that off, right? But if that's what's called a structured survey that's asking you questions. But the data in the wild are people that are leaving reviews and talking about you without you asking them, which is actually becoming more of the volume out there. And so what's happening is unless you get in front of it and control it and ask for reviews and ask for feedback, you can't really gauge it. And so that's the beauty of having kind of an environment where you try to control it and use it in your advantage in your marketing. So I'm gonna go through 6 quick things to kind of give you a little bit of a taste of what's happening in the feedback economy. Google Maps, I just told you, 0-click. Google reviews, if you think the reviews are gaining in the G2 side, you should see the number of Google reviews that are going through the roof. Companies are really being defined or not defined based on their presence in Google. And we spend a lot of time on this with our customers. Real-time action will be the standard for business. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you're sitting in an emergency room and you've been sitting there for 6 hours and your child has got a cut arm and you're really frustrated, the future, which is starting to happen now, is we're seeing people actually get into Twitter and literally do a direct message to that hospital. And we've got hospitals starting to take action now, coming out of the back room based on a direct message in social media. So that's pretty cool. I think that's kind of the wave of where things are going. Can we give ourselves a little clap based on that? That would be kind of cool, huh? If the hospitals actually started doing that. I think it's a big deal if we can get them to act or get anybody to act based on real-time activity. Social will be important for all services, purchase, and feedback. You already know that. We talked a little bit about that. Real-time messaging is starting to become a big deal, not only real-time for whether it's an ER situation, but even just in general feedback on anything that you want to get real-time feedback on. Now more and more people are buying cars through SMS texting. So they're messaging that dealership, getting pictures of the cars they're interested in, and most likely doing a transaction right then and there in their house as opposed to going on site. So these are some things that are happening in the feedback economy that are really interesting. The last thing is machine learning. Machine learning is really kind of here to stay. In terms of understanding that kind of volume, I just walked you through a couple examples that are literally millions and millions of points of interest. If you don't have machine learning or some kind of artificial intelligence to gather all that data, put it together in some kind of fancy attribution so that you as the CMO or the brand controller for that company can quickly determine what's really going on with their products, then it's really not useful. And so now we're starting to see machine learning become super important as you start to gather all that feedback because there's just too much of it. And as you start to get that kind of volume, companies like Reputation.com will pull it up to a base where somebody could say, okay, our wait time is pretty good, our parking sucks, our doctor's bedside manner is pretty good, our nursing care is pretty good. You can actually gauge it. And one of the things that we've been doing as a company is we use something called the reputation score to actually score how that company's doing based on all the things I've been telling you about. So essentially you get it by industry, and now we're starting to see certain industries use the reputation score as a meter for customer satisfaction. So we're seeing commercials from AutoNation, we're seeing commercials from Ford where they're actually starting to talk about their reputation score, which is good for all of us because at the end of the day, we want people to care about their reputation score so that they're servicing us in a much more positive way. So I just kind of wanted to take you through today a little bit. I kind of started with the meat, which is how we use G2 in 3 different companies and how you could potentially use that with your SDR group, as well as a little bit about who Reputation.com is. And then this whole feedback economy, if you just think about what we're doing on the consumer side and what G2 is doing on the B2B side, it's here. And I think the volume and how you leverage it on the sales side can be a strength for you if you choose to use it that way. For me, it's been super successful over 3 different companies to be able to use the power of a customer review. Now listen, the other side of this is you got to be really, really careful with your customer success group because you got to make sure you have a lot of positive customers to leave really good positive reviews. So if on the sales side you want to use that momentum from the brand, you got to make sure your customer success team is there with you in lockstep so that you get a ton of positive reviews. So at Reputation.com, we have like 250 reviews. I checked it this morning when he said, hey, bring up your page. And I think I was somewhere in the G2, the people standing, I think I was probably in the middle. There was a few with 500, and then there was one with 9,000 from Oracle. But I think we're getting there. I think that's kind of the fun thing about, you got to be super customer focused if you're a software company that wants to leverage G2 correctly, because you got to have positive customer reviews in order to be able to use it in a positive manner. So that's kind of the messaging that I wanted to bring with you today. I appreciate you guys having me on stage. I'm going to end a couple of minutes early just to help you. But I appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks.